there was this person in a pickup truck that kept driving slowly by my house, putting stuff in my mailbox, and I called the police in my Indiana suburb, and they came to my house, and I explained what's going on, and the officer said, "Well, ma'am, that's what you get when you mess with the Second Amendment."
Hi, I'm Sally Christensen, the founder and CEO of Argent, a women's workwear brand. And this is Work Friends, a podcast for those who take their work, but not always themselves, seriously.
Work Friends.
Today I am joined by Shannon Watts, the founder of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, the largest grassroots movement in the country. In 2012, Shannon lit the spark for her career in activism when she posted a call to action on Facebook to end gun violence in response to the horrors of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Her message was met with overwhelming response, and the mother of 5 and former communications executive soon founded Moms Demand Action. Shannon stepped down as founder in 2023 and is currently on the board of Emerge America, an organization intended to recruit and train women to run for office, and Advance Peace, a community-based organization focused on ending gun violence. This month, Shannon also debuts her second book, Fired Up: How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age. I'm honored she's here to tell us more about it and inspire us with her story. Now, on Work Friends, Shannon Watts. Shannon, welcome.
Thank you.
We're very excited that you're here. So I have admired your work for forever, but we haven't gotten to spend a lot of time together, and I kind of love that it's recorded.
Yes, me too.
Because it's going to be a discovery for me. But before we dive in, we like to start with an icebreaker here at Work Friends. So what we'd love to hear about is your biggest oh no moment this week. What's gone sideways, and how did you handle it?
Oh, my biggest oh no moment. Probably when I got to my apartment in New York, which we decided to get a little apartment after our kids went to college so we could visit here, and realized we don't have a better couch.
Who needs it? Who needs it?
And so there was some real Amazon purchases being made, like a blow-up mattress, and we're sleeping on the bed or the floor like we're camping. But I don't know, it was kind of fun. At first, it seemed concerning, but then it ended up being, oh, okay, we're going to handle this. We're going to get through it.
Yeah. Welcome to New York.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're going to get into it. So can you tell me a bit about where you grew up in Rochester, New York, and what some early examples of work were for you? Any examples of activism? Because that's really, you've become, I think, one of my favorite activists and organizers.
That's so kind. I grew up in upstate New York, and it is a place where a lot of activists pass through. People like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, Clara Bow, on and on. And I was raised to admire these activists on field trips. I can remember we even went to Joseph Smith's house, who started the Mormon religion. And we would go to these different places and they would tell us about the people. And it was very inspiring for me. We had to make this diorama in 5th grade where you filled a box with dirt. And I can remember, other people put trees and things in there. And I did Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. So
cool, yeah.
I was very impacted by these teachings. And as I grew up, I didn't know really what I wanted to be, in part because I had horrific ADHD. And I was diagnosed at 14 in the 1980s. So it was bad that they took a girl to the doctor and the doctor said, this girl has ADHD. But I wasn't treated because my parents, there was a real stigma around medication back then. So I didn't really think about what I wanted to do or who I wanted to be because I had such a hard time getting through school. I started failing out of school in the 8th grade. Mm-hmm. And to get through, I got through every grade, including college, by the skin of my teeth. And it was then that I felt like my brain was finally developing. And I ended up in public relations, not something I thought I was going to end up in, and just started to excel. It was really something that I was good at and that I had the skill set for. And it really laid the foundation for my activism.
To rewind a little bit, did you have siblings?
No, I'm an only child.
Okay. And then it sounds like you were exposed to activism through school and also your parents, or just more through school?
More through school, although, my dad was one of 5 Irish boys, mm-hmm. and one of them had to be a priest, obviously, and so it was him. He went into the seminary at 13, was taught by the Jesuits for a decade. He was there, 13 to 23. And when he came out, he I think, decided that he didn't want to live a life of celibacy, but he he was very impacted by the Jesuits. And so, he was the first white member of the NAACP at Northwestern. And so I think also those values were instilled in me.
So I've learned a ton about ADHD just from experiencing it now on the parenting side. One of the things that's fascinated me, and the reason that I picked up on it late, is that like my son's able to focus on things for extended periods of time.
Yes.
And so I'm curious to hear about maybe things that you were passionate about, because that's what's really fascinating. It's like an inability to control your like focus.
Yes.
There are pros and cons with that. The most incredible, magical people I feel like in the world often are on the spectrum in some capacity.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they have superpowers in certain functions or aspects of life because they're just sucked in by it. Yep. So did that manifest in childhood in any way? Like, were there things that you were really, really enamored by?
Thank God there was no social media, because I probably never would have gotten out of that hole. I had books. I was a voracious reader. I read from the moment I woke up till, my parents would come in and I would have a flashlight under my covers reading. I loved words. I would read the thesaurus. I would read the dictionary. I would read the encyclopedia. I was truly a voracious reader my entire childhood, and then I would become obsessed with subjects. I can't imagine there were many people in my high school who were as obsessed with Watergate as I was in the 1980s. like I read every book by every person involved in Watergate. Yeah. I was like a walking encyclopedia. And then I had a hyper focus once I started to work when I was out of college, and I would go deep, right? Like I would be for hours and hours in whatever client I was working on or whatever subject I was working on, and obviously that has also been helpful in activism.
So you studied public relations. That makes sense to me, and then pursued a career, so early career in communications.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that transition into career?
Yes. When I got out of college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an investigative journalist, I think in part because of my obsession with Watergate. I wanted to be, like the people who were reporting on for the Washington Post. And because of my ADHD, I couldn't graduate with my journalism class. You had to have a certain GPA. You had to get through statistics. That was not happening for me. And so I ended up having a minor in journalism with a major in sociology. And it was difficult to become a reporter with that degree of sociology, but it wasn't hard to get into public relations. And then Governor of Missouri, I went to the University of Missouri, Governor Carnahan was hiring, and I can remember I was one of 100 applicants at least. You would actually go into the newspaper in the classified section, apply with your resume.
Oh, yeah.
And I got the job. I think I was making $19,000 a year. And it was fascinating to me to suddenly be in the middle of politics and to be I was writing speeches right out of college for lawmakers.
What stood out about your application, do you think?
I think my application stood out because I was a good writer.
Yeah.
But I think I stood out because I've always been a good communicator and able to tell stories, and I think that's what I do in interviews too. But I remember I had a friend who interviewed me for that job and just said, I could just tell that you had something, that we were hiring that something. And I really cut my teeth at the State House in Missouri. I wasn't very political, wasn't really involved in the politics of it. It was more the communications piece of it. And I didn't grow up in Missouri. I just ended up going to college there, but I spent a decade in Kansas and Missouri. I went from working for Governor Carnahan to working for a major PR firm in Kansas City.
Oh, there are two directions I want to go in. So the first question I want to ask, because I feel like you're uniquely qualified to answer this, is so many people talk about how they don't do politics. And even you just said, I wasn't very political. I think a lot of us are raised to just enjoy life and not really pay attention to politics. Can you talk about why it is important that we pay attention to politics and how even if we're not engaging, that it's affecting us in some capacity?
Yeah, what's the saying? You might not do politics, but politics does you. Mm-hmm. I had sort of the luxury of not having to spend too much time worried about it. My parents, I can remember they were Democrats. I remember they supported Bill Clinton. But it wasn't something we talked a lot about. I went to high school in Texas. And so you didn't really want to talk about it, especially if you were a Democrat. I was so thrilled to have lived in Texas when Ann Richards was the governor. What an amazing experience that was. I do think that was formative for me. She wasn't supposed to win, and her opponent's name was Clay Williams. And The only reason he lost, he was polling ahead all the way until the very end. He was out on a golf course, and someone said, well, the weather isn't very good. And he said, well, the weather is like rape. If it's inevitable, sit back and enjoy it. That's the only reason Ann Richards won that election, was because he said that, and that was considered so egregious that people changed their vote at the last minute.
I mean, that is egregious.
It is egregious.
Yeah.
Even in Texas. Would it be today in politics? That's an interesting question. But yeah, I just was not that involved in politics until I realized that you can't afford to not be. You can't sit on the sidelines. I mean, it's kind of how we've gotten to where we are today, is that I think people take it for granted.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this briefly. I am Turkish, grew up spending my summers in Turkey, have watched Turkey go through a lot of changes. And I think that Americans have taken democracy for granted.
Yes.
And we have certainly been witness to that for the last few decades, but certainly the last few months.
Well, I think when we were talking about this, what was interesting is I said it seemed very fast, but you as an outsider could see it happening for 30 years.
Yeah, it's been happening they've put a strategy in place in, 1973, I think it was, and the Republican Party, and have executed against that strategy to the point where the last 80 days are all part of that plan.
Yes.
Which we'll get there. But I want to stay focused on you and your career. So what were you learning in your first job? And this was a time, it was similar when I entered the workforce, where you're like writing letters and just trying to work your network, but picking up the phone and just trying to break through in any way. It was also a time where if anyone wanted to hire me, I was in, you know? And so it's like, whoever's going to give me a job, I'll even pay them. Like, whatever it takes, I just want some experience.
Yeah.
But not always thinking about what that experience would entail or what I actually wanted to do. I think, just getting in the door is necessary to actually hone, your skill set, but also get an understanding of how the world works and where you want to take your skill set. So I'm curious to hear about that first job experience.
It was amazing. I mean, it felt very glamorous to be asked to write speeches for lawmakers. Now I look back and it's hilarious because it was maybe, a lawmaker going to a picnic in the boot heel of Missouri, and I'm writing his remarks that lasted maybe 2 minutes. But to me, it seemed very glamorous that I was the person who got to write what he said or she said.
Totally.
And I got to interact with the governor, right? And I had a team of people who would really let me do my own thing. It was very entrepreneurial, write about what you want to write about. And then, of course, there was all the drudgery, which was writing condolence letters to people whose obituaries were in the newspaper. I mean, it was the 90s, right? So I would cut these obituaries out and send them snail mail. And, it helped teach me that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to be doing, that kind of work. But it was all a learning experience. It was all formative to everything I ended up doing. Malcolm Gladwell says 10,000 hours of anything makes you an expert. And I certainly spent maybe tens of thousands of hours writing press release and being able to craft a story. And that's what I took with me through my communications career. For example, when I was at GE, they invented this very small ultrasound machine. And you had to look at that ultrasound machine and say, what is that? Oh, maybe that's the stethoscope of the future. How do we create a whole narrative to explain to people why this research is important, what this could do in their lives, and making something that seems a little boring or not important to your everyday life the future, something that's compelling and people want to go to their doctor and ask for that procedure. So that was the training ground for that work.
I think that those jobs also go to young people because they are so hard and grueling and demand a lot of hours. But I do think that the takeaway, especially for new career entrants now, is that you have to be willing to, it's the Malcolm Gladwell quote, put in the work, put in the hours, put in the time. There's so much growth that comes from even like making copies, or doing whatever.
And not saying no to anything.
Correct. Not being too married to what's on the job description.
Yes.
And just taking it as it comes, because you'll learn a lot from it. And there's a quote that's something like good work gets more work or something, which is funny, but it's also, there's so much opportunity when you can prove that you can be trusted with something, One other question related to this before we get into your communications work is who were your models of work? in terms, like, what women were you looking up to specifically? I think you mentioned Ann Richards, but were there other that were inspiring you? Because you were very bold and confident and like very much a leader, I feel like, from early days.
I was. It might be because I'm a Capricorn, but
oh, love that. I'm a Virgo. Virgo loves a good
very
Capricorn.
Similar. Yes. I am the first woman to go to college on my mother's side of the family. I come from a line of impoverished coal miners who, really struggled in Kentucky. And I knew that was an honor. And I knew that I needed to live up to the expectations I was fulfilling. My mom got married at 18, had me at 21.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Didn't go to college. And so for me to be at college in itself the family was like amazed, right? And I had grown up, as I mentioned, with the activists that inspired me, but also Louise Slaughter was one of the very first women congresswomen in this country. There were only a handful of them back in the 70s, and she was one of them, and she served my district. She started as state rep and then became a congresswoman, and was a congresswoman for a very long time. And I have this vivid memory. I was invited to be in a parade for the 4th of July. And I was invited by my realtor, our family's realtor, and I had to wear a box shaped like a house, and the box hit the back of my heels for the entire parade route, and I was just like bleeding into my shoes. But I got to meet Louise Slaughter in this parade because she was, in one of the cars, and it was this momentous. I forgot all about the fact that I was bleeding out of my heels and ankles, and just couldn't believe I was meeting my role model, this woman who I saw in the news, at my house, who was so bold and courageous and a leader.
Oh, it's so awesome. I think that's and I mentioned this a lot, but that's the entire point of Argent is representation, and how do we offer models of work and careers in a way that allows little girls to dream of what their future can look like. Because I grew up on a farm in South Carolina, and I thought, I could be a mom, or, it was pretty much doctor, lawyer, banker. Those were like the only industries I had exposure to, but I didn't know that I could be an employee at Nike or like insert any company here, and I probably would have pursued that path. I think it's so important that we continue to reinforce women as leaders through visual representation, through storytelling. There's so many cool women out in the world doing amazing work. And how do we continue to give future leaders, creators exposure to that? Coming out of your work in politics, you launched your career in communications. Can you walk us through that transition?
Yeah. So after, I worked for Governor Carnahan, who sadly ended up dying in a plane crash when he was running for U.S. Senator. It was really tragic for the state of Missouri. I went into corporate communications. I went into public relations work. It was good. I liked it. I was good at it. There was always this feeling, I write about this in my book, of kind of wanting more. This idea that I thought I was going to be an investigative journalist. I ended up being in public relations. It paid the bills. But I did rise through the ranks. I was a vice president before I was 30. And I ended up going to companies like General Electric and WellPoint. At WellPoint, I supported one of the only Fortune 500 CEOs that was a woman in the country.
Cool.
It was an amazing experience. And I also got to train and elevate other women, which was so thrilling for me that I had that opportunity. I think I've always been a feminist. My dad bought me a shirt when I was 9 that said, "Girls can do anything boys can do." It was 1979. And until I got that shirt, I had no idea that people thought I couldn't. The shirt was supposed to be empowering, but it was more like, wait, what? I didn't even know this was a thing. And so for me, it's always been about, like, how do I summon the audacity of other women? That is what I'm really passionate about. And so that career allowed me to do that. But as I write about in the book, I kind of found myself in my mid-30s realizing I wasn't married to the right person. I wasn't in the right job. I wasn't living a life that made me feel alive. And I had to make some real choices. And part of that was leaving the corporate world, but then so much other opportunity opened up.
Where were you living at that time?
We were living in Indiana.
All of your experiences really, it makes where you are make sense, where you've had exposure to a lot of just different parts of the country.
Yes, I lived in 10 states.
And the way you were raised, it's similar to a lot of the women that we interview and that we feature. My parents never really, like I have an older brother, but gender just wasn't even a conversation, right? They raised us the exact same. I played sports with my older brother. I was always on his teams. If they'd given me that shirt, I would have been like, what is, so it is funny in a backwards way, because I think a lot of what we do is, in terms of talking about gender, it's missing the point, especially with girls, because it was that Run Like a Girl commercial.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's stuff like that where I'm like, no,
it's having the opposite impact.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why you stand out to me, though, in your work, because I think that you've gone to a really nuanced place, and I want to get into that a little bit, but I think the way that you talk about it, think about it, and have a real bias for action is really interesting because it's so impactful. You talked about this sort of pivotal moment in your life, I would say. What steps did you take from I'm in the wrong marriage, I'm in the wrong job, I'm unfulfilled, to get to where you were going next?
Part of it was finding myself in the emergency room. And I had struggled with eczema for several years. It just kind of came out of the blue and then engulfed my entire body.
Stress will flare that up too,
yes.
Right? Yeah.
So I'm covered in eczema. I can't sleep. I can't work. I can't focus. I've got 3 kids under the age of 5. And the doctor looked at me and he said, "How much stress are you under?" And I just broke down. I started sobbing in the office, and I realized I was very much at a crossroads, and that the way I was living was burning me from the outside in, and I needed to make significant changes. And I started to journal, something I had never done in my life. I didn't feel like I could tell my husband, particularly since I was not happy in my marriage. I couldn't afford a therapist at the time, and I just needed to get this out. And the more I wrote, the more it became a roadmap for what was next. And so I did end my marriage. We ended up being very amicable co-parents, so that was excellent. And I did leave my job, and I tried a bunch of different things in the meantime. I had a small business, and I did some consulting, and ultimately I remarried to the love of my life, the most wonderful man who is perfect for me and supportive of me and all that I've done. But then it really laid the groundwork, and I talk about this formula in my book, which is marrying 3 things: your values, your abilities, and your desires, right? And so I had taken that break. I was actually getting ready to go back in the workforce. It was December of 2012. And I was folding laundry, looked up at the news, and there was the news that there was an active shooter in Newtown, Connecticut, a place I'd never heard of. And I just sat on the side of the bed, I'm like you and so many other people in this country, I'm sure, and just watched, devastated, that 20 children and 6 educators had been slaughtered inside the sanctity of an American elementary school. And I went to bed devastated, and I woke up outraged. Just whatever had happened in the middle of the night, alchemy turned that sadness into absolute abject rage. And I went on Facebook, and I just said, it was like this clarion call to action. I saw it happen with Mothers Against Drunk Driving in the 80s. It is time for women and mothers to stand up to the gun lobby, the largest, most wealthy, most powerful special interest in the country. And that was it, right? It was my abilities. I could create a brand. I could tell a story. I could communicate messaging. My values to protect my family and my community, and my desires, which was to build this grassroots army of women who would stop the violence in this country. And I think everything I had done culminated in that moment.
You were obviously fueled by rage, passion, all of the things out. Yeah, I remember that so vividly. I think we all do. This is the origin story for Moms Demand Action. At any point, are you thinking about, are you fearful of embarking on this new journey or new career, I guess? What's your thought process in terms of what steps do I take? Am I set up for success, or is it so much bigger than you that doesn't even enter the equation?
That night that I started it, when we went to bed, I had such an outpouring of people who wanted to help me do this. DMs. I didn't think I would be a public person, so calling me on my phone, sending me emails, texts, DMing me on Facebook, which is where I started Moms Demand Action. We went to bed that night, and my husband looked at me and he said, "I think this is going to be a really big deal." And not in a good way. Like, we were both scared. We were just in a new marriage.
Yeah.
We had 5 kids we were blending. And it felt like a huge amount of energy, and that the time was ripe for this. And as I went on that journey, I think there's a fine line, as they say, between naivete and stupidity. And I was straddling that because I did not know that people would start to threaten my life, my children's life, threats of death, sexual violence immediately. And there was this person in a pickup truck that kept driving slowly by my house, putting stuff in my mailbox, and I called the police in my Indiana suburb, and they came to my house, and I explained what's going on, and the officer said, "Well, ma'am, that's what you get when you mess with the Second Amendment." And so in that moment, I knew I had a choice. I could back down or I could double down. And my personality being what it is, I decided that I was going to double down. And I never looked back. I just decided I wasn't going to let anyone intimidate me or silence me, and obviously our volunteers felt the same way. But I will say that so many women have said to me, "How do you handle the blowback?" Because you're going to get blowback no matter what you do. If you decide to get divorced, if you decide to have a hard conversation, if you decide to volunteer, if you are political, if you want a promotion, like, it is personal, political, and professional. You are going to get blowback. And so I wanted to write about how I handled it, how so many other women handled it, because you can get through it and you will come out stronger on the other side.
The newest pieces from Argent are the ultimate pairing of work and play. Our signature chic tailoring comes alive in lemon yellow, I'm wearing it now, and grass green, which might be my season's favorite. Plus, airy summer dresses serve as the perfect transitional staples, going from desk to dinner, work week to weekend, truly wherever your summer plans take you. As always, Argent fabrics are the biggest game changer in premium Italian seasonless wool, lightweight linen, and 100% cotton to ensure you feel as amazing and confident as you look. Shop all the latest arrivals, including the look seen on Work Friends, at argentwork.com. We talk about that all the time. You have to have really thick skin because you really can't get it right. There's no way to toe that line perfectly. No. And so just awareness of that. And then for me, it's like I have there are a group of people that I respect. And so when there's legitimate feedback on me doing something, that's bad or out of line or whatever, I'll take that feedback. But I feel like you have to understand and recognize that we're operating within a patriarchy.
Yes.
And you, in particular, you're doing something really bold. And it's disruptive, and it scares people that they're going to lose access to their guns, God forbid. And I think that it's a sign that you're doing something right when you get the level of blowback that I imagine that you have. I also think, and I imagine starting Moms Demand Action is similar to starting a company, and you've already kind of said that it is. You have to go in naively, but with a commitment and conviction to whatever your end goal is. And I think that's what you were able to do, is identify exactly what it was you wanted to accomplish. Can you talk about the steps that you took to set up goals and to start, organizing and taking this from idea into, more of a formalized group that was, starting to chip away at some of the goals you wanted to achieve?
I think what you said is so important, that you have to be discerning about the feedback you get.
Yes.
You really have to listen to yourself. Because I had so many people tell me when I started Moms Demand Action, "You're not the right person. This can't be done. You shouldn't do it. You should let someone else do it. This already exists." I mean, it went on and on and on.
Well, can I pause you there and just tell you that every single founder that I talk to that is a woman, every single one, when they go out to fundraise, that's the feedback that they get. You need to hire a CEO. You need to hire someone with business experience. You need the feedback. The list goes on and on and on. And it does not happen to men.
No.
And you have to be so careful, because if you step back, like, I'm able to hear this feedback and then provide context. Oftentimes it's businesses that are already having success. Business isn't that complicated. You sell you pay to make a good, you sell it, you're making money off of it. And it's as simple as that. It's so frustrating to me how much people want to take away our power.
Yes.
And it happens all the time. So sorry, continue.
Yeah, no,
it's so frustrating.
I just knew in my gut, and I trusted myself, and it helped to have a career, under my belt. But I knew that my idea was a good one, and I knew I had leadership qualities, and I knew I had a very specific skill set. I could create a brand that made us seem credible right out of the gate. I could establish a chapter in every state of the country because I'd managed people all over the world. And I could create a good message and story. And then I could bring in other women who had skill sets that I didn't. I mean, I was working with perfect strangers from across the country, women I had never met, who were lawyers or website developers or organizers or lobbyists or fundraisers. You know, it ran the gamut. And I knew enough to know I couldn't do those things. And so we just started to talk to other organizers. I mean, I got on the phone immediately with the CEO of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, who I eventually hired to work at our organization. And I started talking to the volunteers, and I trusted them. I trusted these women, some of whom were walking out of their full-time jobs after the Sandy Hook school shooting because they'd been so impacted to volunteer full-time for this organization I was creating. And I also knew that the worst thing that could happen was that we failed. The worst thing that could happen is it didn't work.
Yeah.
And we would go back to our lives. But what if it didn't? And so we all decided, just like I did those early hours, to double down. And we created, this organization that at first seemed like it was going to have marches and rallies, but then it became very clear that we were going to have to organize, just like the gun lobby had for decades. And so that was the work that we started to do.
You say it very casually. It's such a massive undertaking. I do think, I think it is important to highlight, because I have a similar experience. I went and worked at Cisco. I think that corporate experience is invaluable because what you gain, those organizations move really slowly and have redundancy built in intentionally. It's similar to the government, but in order to move something, a $1 billion company, for example, forward, you have to have that and move at that pace. But I think it's really helpful to learn sort of the ins and outs of that and the politics of it, and you learn so much about people.
Yes.
And so I imagine that did equip you to then step into this role. But I also feel like you probably... It just came fast. It's like drinking from the fire hose.
There were plenty, I talk about it in the book, there were plenty of times I spent, hours crying on the closet floor because that's, I went from this life where I could do what I wanted and was raising kids and driving to soccer games to suddenly being busier than I'd ever been in my career. And I was a spokesperson, so I was on the news and I was trying to get this fledgling organization off the ground, and there was legislation to pass and there was culture to change, and there were people to elect. And suddenly it was my entire life from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed. And that was very overwhelming. And it really required strategy, being strategic about how I was using the resources we had, and then eventually realizing that we needed to partner with another organization. And that's how I came to work with Mike Bloomberg's team, because as you said, when I would go out to fundraise, they would be like, I'm not giving to this random woman from Indiana that I've never heard of, but I will give to an organization that Mike Bloomberg is involved in.
Yeah. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
I also think that the subject matter of what you're touching is so heavy. There's an inordinate amount of pressure that you're carrying and that you're the face of and representative of. Did you feel at any point like you were failing? Was that part of the equation?
I mean, that was a daily feeling.
Yeah.
I wanted to pay people. That was really something, and we can talk about the passion tax. That is a real thing. I worked for 11 years for no pay. I gave all my book proceeds to the organization. I gave all my speaking proceeds to the organization because I was trying to be a good girl, right? And I can look back on that now and see there's a little martyrdom going on there, but also that is what society expects, that I would be doing this out of a passion. But I wanted to be able to pay the women who were working so hard every day right alongside me. And so when we partnered with Mike Bloomberg's team and he graciously gave us, $50 million that first year, then I could pay people. And it felt less like we were failing, and it felt more like we were becoming a real organization. But I knew nothing about gun violence. I knew nothing about organizing. I knew very little about the legislative system. But I knew that women were the secret sauce, and that they were the only ones who I thought could change the culture, the electoral system, the legislative system on this issue. And I just had to have faith in that, even though you're going to fail a lot when you take on a powerful special interest.
What's the mission statement?
The mission statement is to change the culture, to change the laws, to change the elected officials who are in charge of legislating gun safety in this country, and to save lives.
It's very complicated, and I think this is the case with starting any business. I knew nothing about fashion, started Argent, here we are, but it's also very simple. I think that it's very obvious that we have a gun problem in this country.
Yes.
The numbers speak to that. The data supports that. And so at face value, there's a very obvious problem, theoretically, solution. The devil is absolutely in the details, and there's a lot more complexity when you're talking about regulation, legislation, government, et cetera. But that sort of goes back to that idea of what's my ultimate goal. It's safety. It's common sense gun reform. It's a really straightforward agenda, and it's figuring out how to connect the dots. I can't even imagine how complicated that is, but I also think that commitment to the end goal is what has allowed you to be so successful.
And to not be partisan. That was really tough, because it would have been very easy for this to be an issue, because frankly, most Democratic lawmakers care about this issue now. When I started Moms Demand Action, a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, none do. That's a seismic shift in American politics, right? So but we didn't want to leave out half the country. Polling now shows that Republican women and Democratic women agree on the same solutions for gun safety. This is not a partisan issue. And it was because we weren't going in there and saying, we're going to ban the Second Amendment, we're going to ban guns. It was, how do we restore the responsibilities that should go along with gun rights, right? There's 400 million guns in this country. And so if you truly want to make progress, I think we've been kind of like going around this issue a lot, which is incrementalism. Whether it's in the work world, whether it's in our lives, whether it's in activism, it is these baby steps that lead to revolutions. And we knew that if we were focused on change, which is usually not in big, dramatic sweeps, but in smaller incremental steps, that we would eventually win.
To that end, I'm curious to hear what you consider your biggest accomplishments, most important work as an activist. And can you speak more to a time that you got it wrong?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, the accomplishments, we passed the first federal gun safety legislation in over 26 years, in a generation, in 2022. I did not think that bill had a snowball's chance in hell, and so I guess this is a combination of success and being wrong, which is after the shootings in Uvalde and Buffalo, I did not think that it made a lot of sense to invest our time and resources in trying to pass this legislation. We didn't have really strategically enough senators who would vote for it. It was very unlikely to be a priority for the Biden administration, given all of the other things that were going on. And someone said to me, this is the time. This is actually worth it to push, because maybe it can happen. And so we went, to daily rallies and held marches and made a ton of calls to our lawmakers. And if you go back to after Sandy Hook, there was a bill that was put forward called the Manchin-Toomey bill. Mm-hmm. Bipartisan bill that would have closed the background check loophole. Failed by a handful of votes in the Senate, including those senators I mentioned who were Democrats and had an A rating from the NRA. Flash forward to 2022, we got 15 Republican senators to vote for our bill, because they were hearing from their constituents 10-1 in favor of it, because we had built this huge army.
Gives me chills.
Yeah. That we could deploy to show up, to make calls, to send emails. And Todd Young, a Republican senator in Indiana, said, I'm hearing every day from my constituents who want me to help them with their safety, to make their community safer. And that bill passed. And I was standing in the Rose Garden when I realized it was the bookend to my work, right? That I had started after Sandy Hook, and that I was going to end after the Uvalde and Buffalo shootings. And it was going to end with that landmark legislation.
You just mentioned, so you stepped down from Moms Demand Action in 2023, because I imagine you're still involved in some capacity. What does your participation look like now with the organization?
I'm an everyday volunteer.
That's great. That's great.
But, when I started Moms Demand Action, a woman in Silicon Valley reached out to me. She wanted to help. She was amazing for years and years. And I can remember she said to me, just like in passing, don't get founder syndrome. And I said, of course not. And I had no idea what that was, so I had to go home and Google it.
What is it?
Founder syndrome is when someone who founds an organization becomes so enmeshed in it, their identity becomes so intertwined that when they leave, the organization fails, either because they set it on fire or because it can't succeed without them. And so I'm a practicing Buddhist, and I thought, okay, this is going to be a great practice for me to manage my ego, Moms Demand Action. And every year I would say to myself, is this the year I step back? Knowing that my leadership would be finite, knowing that my power would be finite. I don't know that a lot of men think this way, but I've seen women think this way. And it was, as I said, in the Rose Garden, when I realized it was time to pass the baton. That 11 years I had done way more than I expected to do, and that fresh energy and ideas would be good for the organization.
You know, it's fascinating. Women, I've watched a lot of founder friends pass the baton to a new CEO, and they'll get persecuted publicly in the media when that happens, when it's actually a sign of success. It doesn't happen with men, obviously, but it is,
or members of Congress,
or anyone else. But it is fascinating with women. I mean, that is a sign that you've done. I had actually not heard of founder syndrome, but I mean, what you've built is so incredible. I've witnessed you from afar for so long. Anyone that's seen you speak or just watched you grow this organization, I think has been enamored by your ability to coalesce just like a lot of different people with different reasons for showing up for this cause. But you've had such success with it, and it's such important work. And so now I'm excited to hear about your next chapter. So you leave Moms Demand Action. You've already spoken to that you feel as if that was the right move for you. And did you know that you wanted to? Did you know what you wanted to do from there? I guess.
No. I mean, I talk about this in the book. I prepared for what I knew was going to be suffering, because my whole identity was wrapped up in Moms Demand Action. And it should have been, but I knew it was also going to be hard to extract myself. And I didn't know who I was without it after 11 years. And so, you know, this was important conversation with my therapist and with my husband to keep me on track so that I didn't backtrack, and to keep moving forward, to know and to be comfortable with the fact that I would be uncomfortable for a while. And so I thought, okay, I took a year to say goodbye. I announced in 22, I left at the end of 23, but somewhere in there, I got a call from Maria Shriver. And I didn't know Maria, but she said, you know, I've been watching you and I have a book in print. I would love for you to write something. And I said, okay, what do you want me to write? And she said, whatever you want. Write about what you've learned working with women, you know, in your career and in your activism. And I thought, when will I get this opportunity again in my lifetime? So I spent the next year. You know, I had written a book again in 2019 about gun safety specifically, and I wrote it with a co-writer, and it was very factual. It was different. This was a personal book about my experience as a woman, and I interviewed 70 other women from all walks of life about their experiences. This idea of women are taught to fulfill their obligations and men are taught to follow their desires. And how do we get to a place where women ask themselves, what do I want? Not what do I have to do? I told you the story of how I figured that out in my 40s, but there's so many amazing stories of women who are figuring it out at all stages of their lives. And so I embarked on writing this book by myself, which was a huge undertaking. And it was really helpful because it helped me focus on something new and different. But I also, you know, coming back to this where I'm so passionate about summoning women's audacity, I met so many women through Moms Demand Action who have amazing ideas, but they didn't think people wanted to hear their story, or they didn't have a story, or why them, or why now. And one of the most common things that I heard from women I interviewed, I would ask every one of them, what are you worried your deathbed regret will be? And almost all of them, because they had children, said, I'm worried that my regret will be I didn't spend enough time with my children and too much pursuing what I wanted. Which is fascinating to me because I'm on the other side of that, right? My youngest is 24. And I traveled all the time with Moms Demand Action. I was always, you know, if there was a mass shooting when I was on a vacation, that was the end of my vacation. And my kids never say, I can't believe you didn't go to that soccer game in 2006. I can't believe you didn't go to the 5th showing of my Peter Pan play. They all say, I'm so grateful I had a mom who showed up and did what she was passionate about, brought me with her, taught me how to live on fire, taught me how to go after what I want to do, my sons and daughters alike. And so that's the same for every woman. And yet we're taught, I think, in this society that we can't have that, you know, that we can't ask ourselves what we want to do. We have to do what we're told by society to do. And I tell so many amazing stories of women in their, you know, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, who are finally asking themselves, what do I want?
It's funny, I have a 7-year-old who came to an event that we did with When We All Vote back in 2024, and I gave just brief remarks, and I said, hi, I'm the CEO and founder of Argent. And after we wrapped, he and I were in the back, and he goes, I can't believe you're the CEO and founder. And he really internalized it. Fast forward to earlier this year, and he made a comment that my husband was on his phone too much. And he goes, Mommy is too, but it's okay because she's the CEO and founder of Argent. And so it's like, it is fascinating, that modeling. Like,
Yes.
my son and daughter, they're constantly playing Office. They're working. They do observe and then model that behavior, and we take them along for the ride. It's very fun.
But we've been taught that is somehow, as a woman, selfish.
Yes.
That we're prioritizing ourselves, our own desires, our own wants. And we need to be self-full, right? We need to be full of the things that we love to do and show that to our kids because they're better for it. And the other thing is, the energy I put into Moms Demand Action, I was putting into my kids. Like, I can admit I was a helicopter parent. And I think there was a real grateful breath there for them to say, okay, we are not our mom's whole lives. Like, she has other things she cares about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm similar in that because I'm able to also integrate them. And I think that's the beauty of being a founder too. I control my day, I control my hours, and it's demanding and it's also overwhelming, and I have those moments of crying in the closet too, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And I think this really speaks to who you are, because I think a lot of times, like, we do see these opportunities, but most people don't take it that extra step, and that's what you want to really encourage us all to do. And so, how do you address it in Fired Up, to help people take meaningful action in their lives, and what is your advice on that?
I talk about a formula that will help you live on fire. And this idea of living on fire is figuring out two things very clearly. What is limiting you and what is calling you? And when we can figure out those things, we can also integrate, and this is the formula, our values, our abilities, and our desires, right? My value, protecting my community, my ability, my communication skills, my desires to create this army of badass women who would take on the gun lobby. We all have that set, and it also just depends on what stage of our lives that we're in. And so constantly asking ourselves that question, what are my values, what are my abilities, what are my desires, and then how do I take steps toward it? There's so much out there in the world right now, thankfully, about what women are doing. Julia Louis-Dreyfus has this amazing podcast about women who are doing amazing things at all ages. My book is the how. How do you get there? How do you figure out who you are and what you want to do? And then how do you take steps toward it? How do you deal with the blowback, like we talked about, the inevitable blowback you're going to get? How do you get through the messy middle to the next side? And then, how do you find your people? And I always go back to when Moms Demand Action, we had this huge army of volunteers. We were double the size of the NRA, right? We had 10 million supporters. It is not hard to get volunteers in the organization, particularly after a lockdown drill or a mass shooting. It is hard to get them to stay. So we said to them, why do you stay? What are the two things, the top two things? And they said, one, they felt like they were winning. So in whatever, this applies to life, personal, professional, political. Always show how you're winning. It means you don't lose hope. It means other people don't lose hope. They want to keep going. They feel energized. They feel inspired. So if you lose, what did you learn so that you win the next time? That's losing forward. The second reason that they stayed was because they found their people. And so when you do these things in community, and I'm starting Firestarter University in the fall, which is this online course for a year based on my book. When you come together in community of dozens or hundreds of women, you can figure out who you are and what you want, and then you have this amazing support system that lifts you up and encourages you to do that. I mean, I experienced that myself through Moms Demand Action. You find your people, you want to keep working with them, you don't want to let them down, and they become a lifeline.
So first I want to just mention, because I did want to mention this earlier, so Moms Demand Action has been the largest grassroots movement in the country. Now moving into this next phase, and talking to your audience and to women, and building a movement around sort of activating. it's like fascinating to look at all the things that you've done in the stages of your career. Like you've done a total 360, in the past decade. An activist, a founder, an author, a podcast host. What do you think 2012 Shannon would think about the work that you're doing today?
I'm so grateful to be able to evolve. I feel so grateful to be alive right now. My mom's generation was expected at 40 or 45 to be done. You go through menopause, you've done what you came to do, you had kids, and now you sort of disappear. I feel like at 54, I'm just getting started. I have so many more things I want to do, personally, professionally, politically. And even talking about menopause is so different for our generation. That wasn't happening in our mom's generation. And, we have the hormone treatments and all the things we can do to keep us vital and alive. And I don't want any woman to get to their end of their life and feel like they didn't burn. And so, this is all about what I enjoy doing, and that's empowering other women to find their own audacity. So I think I'd be shocked, but I'd also be thrilled. And I hope 10 years from now, I can't believe, what I've been able to do in the last 10 years either.
I imagine, because I get this a little bit, and you're doing it in a completely different way. I imagine that a lot of women approach you for advice that you're now offering in your book too.
Yes.
In terms of how do I emulate what you've done? How do I get the courage to do what you've done? And that's really the playbook that you're offering. And just modeling it, honestly, is so invaluable in my opinion. Before we go, can you share some advice for people who've seen the incredible and tangible impact that you've made as an activist and want to emulate this in their work? And it's especially let's apply the lens of our modern day, and it's always hard, but I think it's especially fraught, current climate. What do you think is needed to create successful and sustainable activism now?
I'm not a unicorn. I am not a born leader. I got very lucky that people supported me, and I managed to graduate despite my ADHD and all of the other things that people would have pointed at me and said, that's not the right person for this. And yet I was, right? And so all of us, every woman has that within her. Maybe it's not activism. Maybe it's a difficult conversation they want to have that they've been waiting to have. Maybe it's asking for a promotion. I've talked to so many women who interestingly have said to me, the work I did with Moms Demand Action gave me the courage and the confidence I needed to ask for a divorce. There's so many ways to be a leader and to figure out how to live in a way that will make you come alive. I think this formula in the book is really helpful, which is, again, identifying your values, your abilities, and your desires. And I walk through specifically how to do that, and I tell the stories of other women who have done it. I think when it comes to activism, you can't beat someone who never gives up. And I also think sometimes cynicism is an excuse for inaction. It's very easy to be cynical and stay on the sidelines. It is a practice and a discipline to have hope. And so when you find your people, when you find what makes you feel alive, you feel hopeful. And politics is cyclical. We will get through this. I hope it doesn't take 20 years, 30 years like it has in Turkey. I hope it is not even take the next 4 years. But democracy is kind of like having a sick kid. When your kid has the flu all night, you don't at 3 a.m. peace out and say, this is a lot, I got to get some sleep. You hold their hand until they're better. And I think democracy is the same way.
What would you say your top qualities are?
Oh, my top qualities.
I feel like I'm interviewing you, but I'm so curious to hear you.
Relentless. Strategic. Visionary.
The resilience really stands out to me.
Yeah.
That's, to me, the highest compliment when someone told me I was a cockroach. I was like, great.
Oh, man.
Thank you.
I'm never going away.
Okay, so we do have a closing segment of Would You Rather.
Okay.
Just rapid fire questions, my favorite part of the interview. Would you rather start your day at the crack of dawn or burn the midnight oil?
Burn the midnight oil.
Would you rather go back to school to learn a new skill or teach what you know to a class of newcomers?
Teach what I know.
Would you rather only answer emails with emojis or only answer calls on FaceTime?
Oh my God, emojis, obviously.
Would you? Not obvious. Some people say FaceTime. I'm like, who?
No.
Who has the time? Would you rather write a great piece of feedback or receive a great piece of feedback?
Right.
Would you rather dress up or dress down for work?
Up.
Would you rather accidentally leave your mic unmuted or your camera on?
Oh, mic unmuted.
Oh, that says so much in a good way.
Yeah.
Would you rather lose the doc with all your latest book edits or be asked to add a whole new chapter?
asked to add a whole new chapter.
Would you rather join a political candidate's campaign or run for office yourself?
Run for office.
Yeah, love to hear it. Honestly, I just can't say enough great things. What you're doing, what you have done, what you continue to do is so important for the world, for all of us. So I think, I can just speak for myself. You have modeled, what it means to be resilient, what it means to stand up for your values, what it means to be the punching bag so other people can have the courage and the bravery to also stand up and fight. So I just want to say thank you for everything you've done.
That's so kind, but I also want to say thank you to you, first of all, for making me be able to do that in a way that is dressed up, but also feels like I'm wearing pajamas. So thank you, because they're so comfortable. But really, Argent has been at the forefront of supporting activists. And I always was just amazed. It's such a unique thing that other companies aren't doing. And so to be able to put on an outfit, but to also know that it symbolizes support of democracy and freedom and safety. And I love my orange gun safety suit that you all sent me. So I'm such a fan too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I could talk to you for hours, but thank you, Shannon. And everyone can find more information about your book, Fired Up, and info about how to support the work you do in the show notes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Work Friends, a podcast from Argent. Listen and follow on all podcast platforms and subscribe to the Argent YouTube channel for more clips and bonus content. Plus, email your work questions and dilemmas at workfriends@argentwork.com for a chance to have one of our amazing guests weigh in with advice. I'm Sally Christensen, and we'll see you next time.
Work Friends.
Work Friends is produced by Gina Marinelli with editing by Ryan Woldoff. Our theme music is by Karina De Piano and Melanie Naima. This episode was recorded at Podstream Studios in New York, New York.